Hello and welcome to Glitch Cube. We're a gaming podcast, and each week we take a deeper look into the art of video games. As always, I'm Christian.
I'm Chris.
And welcome back, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us once again as we dive further into the world of games. And this week we are going to be talking about puzzle games. More specifically, a little bit later in the episode, and probably for most of the episode, one of the top selling puzzle games of all time. And that, of course, is Tetris. Tetris is a powerhouse when it comes to video games. For the longest time, it held the title of most copies sold of any other video game out there. It's one of, I believe, 3 games that has the title of selling over 100 million copies. The other ones next to it are GTA 5 and Minecraft. Go figure. But GTA 5 is surprising. That one kind of threw me off, but Minecraft doesn't. Not surprised at all, honestly. But puzzle games are fascinating. It's really interesting to be looking into them because I feel like that's the gateway drug to video games. It really takes no explanation. It takes no outside references from other games or anything like that in order to be good at a puzzle game or to get immersed in them. And they're just fun. I mean, who doesn't like a puzzle? Puzzles have been around for years. And actually, the very first puzzle was made in 1767 by a map maker. He cut up different areas and different territories on a map out of wood and had people reconstruct it. And, so basically the very first jigsaw puzzle. It's pretty interesting. But there's something about a puzzle that just kind of piques our curiosity as human beings. We like to solve problems. We like to see patterns and find the way that things just kind of fit and figure out the world around us. And it just gives us a sense of peace, I would say, right? Being able to look at a world or a video game and figure out the rules, and everything adheres to those rules very strictly. I mean, that's the main mechanic of puzzle games. Whenever you start bending them, then where's your puzzle, right? It's like trying to shove a jigsaw piece in wrong. It just doesn't work, right? Like, this has to go here. So there's something comforting about that, which is actually very interesting. But yeah, I don't know. I played the hell out of Tetris growing up. I love puzzle games through and through. And even it's funny to see that while there is an entire genre for puzzle games, how much puzzles have integrated their way into every other genre out there. Like when you look at JRPGs, like I always remember in Final Fantasy X, right? The orb puzzles in order to get the Eidolons through the shrines. That was, some of those got a little bit annoying, honestly. But then you have like God of War, which had really interesting puzzles throughout its entire gameplay. And it's a very action heavy game, but it took time to slow down the player and engage them in a different way, which I think is really smart as far as the ebb and flow goes. Keeps people engaged a little bit longer. Gives them a different type of challenge to think of, so it's not just hack and slash the whole time. So puzzles can be used really interestingly, and there's some ingenious design out there. I mean, look at Baba Is You, right? Like, that's such a clever design for a game, and it's amazing what you can do with such a quote unquote simple genre, right? And I'm excited. I'm always excited to see the next puzzle game, or the next take on a Take 3, or
Evolution.
Like, what was that? Chef Brigade, or what was that? The cooking one?
Oh, Battle Chef Brigade.
Yeah, Battle Chef Brigade. That game was rad. That was so much fun, and it was a really interesting way of using the combined 3 together, right? Where you rotate your blocks, and they call that stirring. You're stirring in the pot, and you rotate them based on, and then try and match up the colors and get the biggest crystal, right? Like the most combos in a way to make your food delicious. And it is really cool to kind of see how you can take the same concept, the same idea, and multiply it a million different ways. So there's a lot of really good stuff out there for sure.
I like to think back about how when I was first getting into games as a kid, and I mean, granted, there wasn't a whole lot of variety, in the early 90s, mid 90s. And for me, it was always either a platformer or a puzzle game. And I mean, obviously Tetris was kind of the first one because I remember playing on the NES and then playing on the Game Boy. And I think the Game Boy is where I ended up falling in love with puzzle games because there were so many on there.
And if you owned a Game Boy, you owned Tetris, right? So,
oh yeah, that's right. Yep.
Yeah.
And puzzle games have always been something I've enjoyed. I feel like over the years, there have been times where I've just kind of been not sick of them, but I feel like at one point we really saw like a influx of copycats. Whenever there's one big puzzle game, there's going to be 10 puzzle games that take that same idea and barely change anything. But, you know, in recent years, we've had some really good ones come out. You know, like you said, Baba Is You, you know, you look at Talos Principle, Hell Portal, is considered puzzle game. Like there's so many different kinds of puzzle games that it's really interesting to look at and kind of break it down to like, okay, what kind of puzzle game do I enjoy? This is my question to you. Do you enjoy logic puzzle games more or physics-based puzzle games?
Ooh, that's tough. Actually, I would have to say logic-based, to be honest. So the physics-based puzzles are fun, but I always feel like the game gets in the way sometimes.
Right.
Where it's just, oh, I didn't place that 100% right, or the movement is weird, or, or getting like locked out from a pathway because something's just not right. Or, like that can get incredibly frustrating. Whereas like with a logic-based one, the rules are very concrete and obvious, and it's just you trying to get through it, right? It's like what was that game that I've been wanting to play for a while? Ouroboros King, right? It's like playing chess, but that game, for instance, takes chess and makes it, or kind of spins it a little bit. It's a roguelike chess game, but a lot of the pieces move very differently than what you would think a chess game can do. And you can get some really interesting combos, put you in interesting situations, but the rules never change. The rules are very set in stone, and you can see you're lost 10 moves ahead if you're not doing things correctly, right? Like, so I that's why I feel like logic-based games are probably more my thing. I mean, I do love a physics-based puzzle. It is fun, but I feel like the engine sometimes really gets in the way, for sure. But yeah, what about you? Yeah.
I didn't think about that, how the game can work against you sometimes. There have been definitely times in some games where I'm just like, really? Like, that should have worked, but for some reason, the way that one piece fell, it didn't. You know, like, you look at, like, Bridge Constructor and some of the other ones that are really heavy with that physics, and it's like...
Like the World of Goo? Ugh.
You know, everyone always talked about that, and I still have not played it, and I feel like I owe it to myself to play it, because I know that's, like, one of the early indie games that...
It's a fantastic game, but if one thing goes wrong, everything goes wrong. Like, you can have a whole bridge fall because you put one thing, like, kind of off to the wrong side a little bit, right? Like, but the physics does seem pretty good, like I've done it too, where I've built towers straight up and then put a little weight on one side to make a bridge that just falls down just for the fun of it, right? So it is very interesting the way that the mechanics work there.
And I think as the years go by, a lot of these engines and games that people make, the physics gets a lot better and more realistic. And I know during that mid 2000s when, it became more important to have good physics in your game, it was apparent when a game didn't have great physics, especially if it was a puzzle game where you kind of expected it. But I mean, we're at the point now where things are so advanced. It's like a lot of these kind of physics-based puzzles in games in general have gotten so good that it's like, I feel like I don't get cheated by the engine as much as I used to, but I feel like deep down, like, I do enjoy a good logic puzzle. Like, it makes me feel good about myself if I get it right. and that's nice. Which is like with like physics, it's like a chance. So it's like it's exciting, but it also I'm like, well, I don't really feel that smart. I just feel lucky. But
Yeah. There's that like space game that just came out too, the cosmonaut game. I can't remember what it was. But there's a lot of like awkward flailing and physics based in it, right? And a
mm,
lot of times you could just fling something and the game will just kind of like vacuum suck it into the right place. And you're like, cool, I got lucky, right? Like
mm,
it's maybe it might not even be skill. You're just flailing endlessly. You can't go anywhere because you can't swim in space properly or can't control your limbs. It's one of those where you have to control each limb separately and
oh
you just
god.
you get lucky sometimes, right? So I feel like that when I think physics based like puzzle games, my mind goes there because there's so many now that are like that, like Octodad and everything, right? Like so, it I don't know. There's just something about it where it just feels luck based. Where like, but you said the logic based ones, you really feel like you did this, you accomplished it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it feels good for sure. All right. Well, I think it might be time to dive into the big game, right? The reason why we kind of thought about talking about Tetris at all, honestly, is because of the show that's coming out. And it's very interesting that they decided to make an entire show about Tetris. But when you really dive into the history behind it, it is pretty fascinating how Tetris came about, how many plates were spinning, and how many under the table deals were made and misinformation and so many different copies of stuff that ended up being illegal. It's a very interesting story for sure. And there's just so much to it. But I think the big part about this is the timing in which Tetris came out. So Tetris came or was invented in 1984. Now, this is towards the end of the Cold War. So Russia is not doing so hot, right? There's a lot of distrust in the government, and there's a lot of stuff that like just I think the price of oil like dipped like drastically. There's a lot of dissent within the communities themselves, and there's a lot of distrust with the government as far as creating like put it this way, right? In America, video games were starting to flourish and become like a major part of the world. And everywhere else, honestly. In Russia, there were no game companies. That wasn't a thing. Like you didn't make video games there. Everything was very you're getting a job to benefit the government in some way and that's it, right? Like this for the
Yep.
motherland and that's everything there. But like everyone still needs an outlet. And I think that's what's amazing about this is that Tetris and a lot of other video games that were made in Russia were made as a way to blow off steam after work, which I think is pretty fascinating. But the person who made Tetris was Alexei Pajitnov, right? That's how you say it, Pajitnov.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He was a fan of board games, puzzle games, his whole life, a lot of math puzzles. And actually, his favorite game was a game called Pentominoes. Pentominoes, for those of you who don't know, is basically you have a rectangular box and you have to put the pieces into the box, and they resemble Tetris pieces, actually, which is pretty interesting, in the correct way in order to fill out that rectangular box without any pieces left, no gaps or anything like that, right? So that's one of the games that he really enjoyed a lot. And he also was incredibly fascinated with space. So he ended up getting a degree from the Moscow Institute of Aviation, where he earned his master's in applied mathematics. And then he ended up getting a job working as a engineer with his master's degree, of course. But the working conditions were pretty, I would say, not great. Like he had a very crowded work environment. There was 3 to a desk, which I think is kind of insane. And the hours that he worked were pretty bizarre. But he always said that he was a happy guy. He loved his job. He loved what he was doing. But he would work from 10 a.m. to midnight every single day. Right? Like that's a long, like you love your job, right? Okay, sure. But apparently they didn't actually work the whole time. So when the lab got shut down, him and a lot of his engineering friends would hang around and use the supercomputers because they didn't have access to the computers at home. So they would hang out at work so they can, make games, try out new things, and just see what they can do. So one of the things that Pajanov did was he actually remade Pentamenos in or on the PC, which is pretty cool. But quickly he realized this is not that fun for a lot of people because once you find the solution, that's kind of it, right? Like you all know those little handheld puzzle games, right? Like the bent nails and stuff like that. Once you figure out the trick, it loses its magic and you solve the puzzle and you're just going to keep doing the same thing over and over again. That's Pentamenos, right? Once you figure out the right placement of it, then that's kind of the whole game. So he wanted to figure out a way to make Pentamenos more interesting. And so he actually made it where you couldn't select the pieces falling. He had them falling from, or you couldn't select the pieces put in the box. He had them actually falling from a vertical height. So similar to how we see Tetris nowadays. And then he started, instead of it just filling up the space, because he noticed a lot of gaps and things like that due to the randomness of the shapes, that's whenever he added in, if you make a full line, that line gets removed so that you can try and remove the spare or like the empty spaces in between the blocks. So this is his very first version of Tetris. And the name Tetris is interesting. It's actually a mixture between Tetra and tennis. Tennis is his favorite game in the world, apparently. So he wanted to really showcase that. But Tetra, if you look at the Tetris pieces, they're made out of 4 blocks, right? So 4 little squares. Whereas Pentamenos was actually made out of shapes that used 5 blocks. So he simplified the shapes to make it easier for the computer to render them. And that's why we have these famous 4-shape configurations or 4-square configurations. So that's where everything comes about. But I just really love the fact that he just made this on his spare time. And I really think it's great that he made it under the government's eyes. Especially during this time with the government being or the Russian government being so watchful of absolutely everything that everyone is doing, where they're just doing random raids and shakedowns of people and just all this stuff. And here they are in an aviation lab working on AI and speech recognition. Like that was his field of study or his field of expertise. And then once they clock out, they keep hanging out at work and they make video games and share it with one another. I think that's a really interesting story, the way that it gets started for sure. I mean, it's not something that you would expect every day, but I don't know. I would certainly try and use those resources available to me. I feel like I'm doing that already at work, but I mean, wouldn't you? Right?
Mm-hmm. It's very rebellious in a way that doesn't seem like it would be rebellious almost.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. It's like subtle rebellion. It's like I'm going against my motherland, but I'm not really doing anything. I'm making a video game. Come on, right? It's not like you're really rebelling against anything. But this is where the first little weird kind of hiccup comes into play, right? So since Tetris was actually made using government property, it is technically the property of the government. It is not Pajanov's game. It is the Russian government's game because he used their resources to make it. So that's why in the early days, he never tried to distribute it, or at least for money. He did distribute it to quite a few people, actually. And he sent it around all over Russia to friends, colleagues, and those friends sent it to their friends. And this game started to spread like wildfire. And eventually it ended up in the hands of a clinical psychologist. His name was Pokilko. Yeah, Pokilko. Sorry. And he actually distributed it to his employees. After he played it, he realized, oh, this is actually really fun. And this game was really deceptive, right? So like we know what Tetris looks like, but back then the graphics were even more simple, right? Like it really was nothing to it, but there's something addicting about this game. So this psychologist passed it around to his fellow employees, but then he started to realize something very interesting. And that's that nobody was getting any work done. Everyone was just playing Tetris. Everyone was hooked. They were sold on this. Like they didn't want to do anything else. So what did Pokilko do? He took every single copy of Tetris and destroyed them because he wanted people to actually get back to work,
Huh.
which I think is really funny. But it did end up making its way back into the psychologist lab through somebody else. They got a copy from someone and passed it back around to the employees. So, like, this thing's not going to die, right? It's just going to stick around. So, he decided to spin it. And they ended up studying addiction using Tetris, which was pretty interesting. And they
Hmm.
actually asked Pajanov to make a 2-player version of Tetris specifically for their lab so that they can actually study addiction between and using 2 different people at the same time, right? To see if there was different types of personality, different sexes, things like that would react differently to an addictive game like Tetris, which I think is pretty interesting. So there's a lot of buzz around this game. A lot of people are really, really enjoying it, but it's still just free. It's not anything major. But whenever people play it, they get it. They really love it. And what's funny about this, it's so interesting to think, and I'm curious of what you might think about this, where nowadays when we see game trailers or anything like that, it's always so over the top where they're
Hmm.
actually like putting in 3D renderings that have nothing to do with the game. It doesn't follow the game's graphics at all. It might not look like anything like what you're going to end up playing, but they're using it to sell what they have in front of them. Whereas with Tetris, they didn't really have anything like that. And you can't really overplay what you're going to be getting into, but it was more of a, here, try it out. And then you just can't stop playing it. I don't think I've ever met anyone that is like, I hate Tetris. It's just, I don't think that exists. So I'm wondering should we kind of take back what Tetris was doing and just show off the raw game? If your game is fun, let that shine, right? Like, I'm wondering if maybe we should start thinking about that more instead of just making the next big flashy trailer for something.
For me, I feel like Tetris, like deep down, it's almost a perfect game, right?
Yeah.
It's easy to understand. Like anybody could play it. I mean, even my dad played it. My mom played it. Like majority of people I've met have played it or at least understand how to play it. Um, it's super simple and makes sense. Like it to me, it's a game that anybody could pick up. If they don't even know how to play a video game, I feel like it's something they could learn within 5 minutes. Because literally it's very minimal button pressing, and it it's addicting, right? I was thinking like, so there's this game Hall of Fame done by the Strong Museum, and Tetris was one of the first games inducted into that Hall of Fame, and like I
Makes
look at it
sense.
that year and it was Pong, Pac-Man, Super Mario Brothers, World of Warcraft, Doom, and Tetris, which, you look at that and it's like, that's a pretty damn solid list right there of like what you could consider like perfect of those types.
Hmm.
But with Tetris, to me, it it does something that no other game really can do, and it's just the simplicity. And that's something I really respect it for. Like growing up, I never really had this like affinity to it. I always enjoyed playing it, but I never looked at it from the point of view where it's like, damn, anybody could really pick this up.
Mm-hmm.
And it's wild to think about. I mean, to think that it was the highest selling game for decades, right? Like up until just a few years ago, like it's crazy because I mean, one, you're like, well, where's everyone buying Tetris? You know, I know Tetris
Right.
Effect exists and it's very cool playing that in VR. Like it's definitely a trip, but when you compare it to a lot of other games that have sold a lot of copies, I'm just like, Tetris is still outsold Wii Sports? Like, you're crazy, you know? But makes sense. I mean, anybody could play it.
Yeah, it really is the game for any person, for anyone.
Mhm.
And that is actually a very important note, and we'll get to that at the end of this little spiel here. Because that is actually a major selling point, and why I think Tetris honestly is as big as it is right now. It's like final seal on all these random contracts that end up popping up right now and all that stuff. But there's something that comes of the whole idea of Tetris is for everyone, right? So it's a very interesting concept there, and a really great selling point, and to a company that we all know and love and love hate ish, right? It's a company that's been around for a very long time, but they knew what they were doing whenever they boxed Tetris for sure. But at this point in time, Tetris was still just distributed amongst engineers and scientists just randomly. It was just burned copies after burned copies going around all over the place. And eventually it ends up at the SCKI Institute of Science, of Computer Science in Budapest, Hungary. Now, Budapest, Hungary is a very interesting area right now, right? It's the closest that Russia can get to Western culture. Right. It's a neighbor, but it's since they're not, really dealing with America still because of the Cold War, this is kind of the closest thing that they can get. And Hungary is actually known for another really famous puzzle out there. It's the Rubik's Cube. The Rubik's Cube was actually invented in Hungary as well. So there's a lot there. It's kind of interesting that Tetris and the Rubik's Cube both have like their homes there. Thought that was kind of a nice little touch. But in that institute, it was actually ported to the Commodore 64 and the Apple II. Because actually, while Russia was still like during the space race and everything like that, they still had like last season's technology. Pajanov wasn't using a Commodore and Apple II in order to in order to do his job. I forgot what PC they were using, but it was not as complex as the Commodore or the Apple II. So people were starting to port it over to these more advanced software. And that's where Robert Stein comes into play. So Robert Stein is an incredibly important character in the life of Tetris. He's the one that tries to acquire the licensing deals for Tetris and ends up trying to sell the rights to Tetris to multiple companies at the same exact time and creating a huge mess. So while, yes, he helped pave the way for Tetris to become a household name, he also made it incredibly confusing for every single person involved. and incredibly difficult to kind of keep track of. But he was the owner of Andromeda Software, and he actually licensed out software and games. He would travel around looking for the next hot game, and he would, pay for licensing fees so that he can port them to the PC or the home consoles or things like that, or arcades, right? So that was his job, his thing. So he ended up seeing Tetris one day, and he loved it. He was walking past someone's desk. They happened to be playing it. He asked him, what is this stuff? And he watches it for a few minutes and is like, I need to find the person who made this. So he actually gets in contact with Pajanov through fax, not text, right? So he sends him a fax asking for the licensing rights to Tetris. And through some back and forth, because obviously the Russian government got a little bit involved, right? You're sending faxes to a government facility. They're going to oversee some stuff. And through some translation so that Stein can actually read the Russian that Pajanov was reading or writing, there was a little bit of miscommunication where, from Stein's point of view, he had a deal with Pajanov. He had a unsigned but verbal agreement that Stein can have the licensing rights to Tetris. Whereas Pajanov basically just said, that sounds great. Let's have a conversation about it. Right. So there's a lot of miscommunication there. But Stein takes this and he runs with it. And he actually goes to a couple different companies right off the bat. He goes to Mirrorsoft and HoloByte, who are two really big companies during this time. And he tries to sell them the game of Tetris. I believe one, it's for like different consoles or PCs, right? So like one gets the rights to the PCs, one gets the rights to arcade. Like that's kind of how they parse out the licensing itself. So it's not just to the title of Tetris, it's to the rights of like PCs in North America and PCs in Japan, or consoles in North America or consoles in Japan. So you can see how this can get really muddy as far as that goes. So he sells them these rights to start making the game without actually sealing the deal with Pajanov. And obviously that is a major problem because Stein is paid, but there is no actual deal. So there's a lot of things going on. And even though there is no clear concrete deal, Mirrorsoft and HoloByte make their versions of Tetris. Like they actually create them and they start distributing them even though no deal has ever been made, which is just like, come on. Like it's kind of ridiculous, right? So what ends up happening is this company called Elorg. It's a random Russian company that kind of takes over all proceedings of Tetris going forward. They find out that Stein had gone through with a bunch of deals selling the rights to Tetris whenever he didn't actually own them. And in 1988, he was sent a message saying that he acquired it illegally and he needs to basically cease all business when it comes to Tetris. And now all communication needs to go through Elorg. They are the ones that will be making the deal because they found out Pajanov was in communications with him and they got pretty pissed. They basically thought he was hiding something from the Russian government, right? And the Russian government owned the rights to Tetris. Pajanov did not. But when they looked at all the contracts, or quote unquote contracts, they're really just faxes going back and forth, there was no actual deal signed ever. But yet Tetris was being distributed. So that's where it gets really, really crazy. But despite that, Tetris is out in the world now. It's actually getting raving reviews. And it's actually pretty funny that there were some conspiracy theorists out there that believed that Tetris was designed by the Russians to make Americans less efficient at their jobs and to distract them from things. So because Tetris was so addicting, which I think is hilarious. But this is still during the whole big deal with like the Cold War and everything like that. So I guess it kind of makes sense. But throughout all this, one day Tetris is being showed off at a roadshow. And this is where bulletproof software comes into play, or Hank Rogers. And for those of you who listened to our RPG episode recently, Hank Rogers is the designer of the quote-unquote first JRPG, right? It's the Black Onyx. And he is he made bulletproof software, and he's working with Nintendo directly, and he finds Tetris and he tries to figure out how are we going to make this a deal, or like how are we going to make this thing happen. They want it, right? They want it for the consoles. But at that time, when Nintendo reached out to try and acquire it, apparently the rights to consoles had already been sold to Atari. So there was already a deal with Elorg without anyone knowing that Atari had acquired the rights to Tetris for the consoles. So this is pretty interesting, but Hank Rogers still didn't want to give up on Tetris. He still wanted to figure out how to get it, how to acquire it. And so he took it to the head of Nintendo, and actually the head of Nintendo reached out to one of his best designers at the time, a name that we probably all know, Miyamoto, and showed him Tetris to get his opinion on it. And Miyamoto said, "It's a good game." And that's it. But that was enough. That was enough to really make Nintendo want this game. So they actually went behind Atari's back and made a deal with L.org for the console rights to Tetris. And I forgot, it was a ridiculous amount of money that they spent, like an exorbitant amount of money for the rights to this thing. I can't remember the exact figure off the top of my head. But the entire time, Stein's still like kind of doing some shady deals. There's still a lot of miscommunication and all this stuff. But with Nintendo just kind of going behind the scenes and talking to L.org directly and acquiring the rights, they basically end all arguments. They own it, right? And there is no dispute that they own it anymore, because they're like the original contracts and the way things were written up, everything was really kind of confusing and a little weird and a little vague. So one of the licensing agreements had mentioned something along the lines of they own the rights to it being on like the Commodore 64, the Apple II, and other computing systems. But computing systems can be pretty much anything. It can be a game system, a computer, whatever it may be. Now, with the deal with Nintendo, what a computing system actually boils down to was very, very well detailed. It was actually a computer, not a console. So that whole agreement that they had beforehand, which Stein was kind of using as a way to work around to try and sell the rights to the consoles to these other companies, just got, the rug pulled out right from underneath him on that one. So now Nintendo owns the rights to this game 100% on the consoles. They have it. And so around this time, the Game Boy is going to be coming out. And this is where I mentioned before that, Tetris is for everybody. Well, one of the big things is that the game that was originally supposed to come out with Nintendo's Game Boy, because they always package a game with them, was Super Mario Brothers, right? That was going to be the game. It makes sense. It's Nintendo's property. But Hank Rogers went to the president of Nintendo at the time and said, look, if you put Super Mario Brothers with the Game Boy, only little boys are going to play your console. But if you put Tetris with the Game Boy, everyone is going to play your console. Everyone's going to want a Game Boy. And he was right. Like, it sold so many copies, and now it's known as one of the top selling games of all time. Like, it's pretty crazy how many different hands were involved with this game, and just how many different countries and how many different like weird contracts, that I'm actually very excited to see the show and see how they kind of explain things and show it off, because there's a lot more drama behind the scenes than I really imagined. It's really cool.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Like I've seen some documentaries on it and stuff, but I'm curious how the show is going to portray some of this, not backstabbing, but drama to it. Because I feel like in a documentary, you can't really sense that kind of urgency. Whereas like with this show, obviously they'll turn the dial on the drama up to 11, but
oh yeah, a bunch of sweaty guys yelling at phones, cigarette smoke in the background.
You'll just hear them, "Give me my Tetris." Yeah. It's interesting, and something, going back to Atari and Nintendo. This is obviously once Tetris on the NES. So Atari, after, I think it was 84, kind of when, the Atari was going downhill. There was two companies. There was Atari Corporation, which mostly handled the computer and console games and hardware. And there was another. So basically, if Atari wanted to make games on another platform, they had to come up with a different name. And they created the name Tengen.
Oh, yeah.
basically the game cartridges on the NES looked totally different. They were like these weird black, like kind of concave shape at the end, and they were just really different. Almost, you could almost think they were like kind of like bootlegs to an extent, because some of them were very rough reworks. And the reason why they did this was because back on the NES, Nintendo had a very strict policy on how many games a company could produce for the NES. I think it was 2.
Oh, that's interesting.
It was only 5 games per year mandated, that Nintendo could only be the ones that manufacture the cartridge. And they had to be NES exclusive for 2 years. But yeah, I think there was also a limit. That's why there was this other brand. It's not super. There was another. If you see the logo on an NES cartridge, you'd be like, "Oh yeah, they had a lot of games." And they were also a knockoff brand. So when you look back at the NES, a lot of companies had 2 companies to get around that Nintendo restriction. Nintendo was very serious about that quality seal of approval, which, look at games nowadays, right? You look at Steam and you got like 10 new bondage and waifu dating games every hour. Whereas back then, it was very strict. And yes, there were not so great games back then too, but it just worked back then, right? There was a very limited library. So, I mean, even a quote-unquote bad game would still be a game to play.
Because there wasn't that much, yeah.
Yeah, you couldn't be like, oh, well, this game sucks, but it's like, so back then they were very strict. So Tengen originally went to Nintendo and was like, hey, can we put a little less restriction on it? And Nintendo said no. Well, Atari said that, right? And that's why they created Tengen. And Tengen did a lot of, like, they did the Gauntlet version, they did Pac-Man, but their Tetris was interesting and different. Obviously, it was the same core game, but there were some differences. The audio files, the music, obviously didn't sound as good. Very grainy, very not so great sounds for a chiptune. But the biggest draw that actually people preferred about this version is that it actually had a 2-player mode, which the original NES Tetris did not have. It only had a single player. So it's kind of interesting that this, like, one-off game had a mode that the original didn't have. And I actually didn't know that until not too long ago, and I was kind of looking into what Tengen was, because I remember seeing a cartridge and being like, oh, this looks kind of weird. But yeah, there's a huge history on Tengen for anyone out there interested in it. Like, there's a lot of info out there too, but it's actually really fascinating if you dive into their battles with Nintendo, their legal battles, and also, like, it just really shows, like, how restrictive Nintendo was. I think they were like that even kind of up into the Super Nintendo, and then they kind of lessened it, which is kind of where you started seeing the libraries getting bigger and bigger, because they allowed more games to get released. But yeah, it was kind of fascinating seeing Atari do that, right? Because, I mean, think about it. Like, Nintendo was one of the nails in the coffin for Atari. So it was interesting seeing it from that point. But yeah, I mean, there's a whole... You could really question Nintendo's take on Tetris, but I might get into that in a little bit with its sequels.
Oh, yeah. Actually, if you want to dive into that now, why not?
Sure. Yeah. So the thing with, when you think about Tetris, right, how can you improve on it, right? Like, it has all you need, right? Match the blocks, fill the space, done. You don't need to do anything more to it. So going over Petronov's stuff, after Tetris, he created a few other games, actually quite a couple, but staying in that generation of console and computer, he had Weltris, he had Faces, which is interesting. For people out there that don't know, it's imagine Tetris, but with people's faces. Basically, you're lining blocks up to create faces. It's a very weird concept that, looking at it just doesn't look like it works, but it did back then. He also created Hatris, which I actually didn't know that was a game. I remember playing a lot of Team Fortress 2 back in the day, and everyone always called the stacking of hats Hatris. And I was like, oh, that's kind of funny. I didn't realize there was an actual game where you stack hats. That actually looks kind of fun. Not as fun as Tetris, but it makes sense. Like, it's pretty close. After that, his games kind of went a little different, always kind of staying in the puzzle realm. Wordtris was kind of the take on Scrabble meets Tetris, which is, I don't know. I was watching quite a bit of gameplay on it, and I'm like, I don't know if that really works, because I feel like with Scrabble, it just kind of works because you see all the letters, you see your 7 letters, and you're like, oh, I can create a word like this. Whereas with Wordtris, it's like, here's a letter, and you have to be like on it, right? After that, it just kind of mix and match with games. Came out with Tetrisphere, which I remember for the N64. It's kind of like Tetris, but on like a globe. So it's like this 3D circle. Well, obviously, it's a sphere, but
was that on
really
N64?
Interesting. Yeah, I remember seeing this cover of Blockbuster.
I played it. I forgot about that game. He plays like little robots too. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, I always thought it was kind of cool. Like, I always loved the evolution of Tetris games, which I'll get into in a minute. And then I'll actually, you know what? Let's dial it back to the sequel of Tetris before I get into Patrono's more recent endeavors. But so Nintendo decided to take Tetris in their own hands. And as I was going through these games just now with, Patrono made, he didn't work on Tetris 2. He didn't work on all these other Tetris titles. Actually, after Tetris itself, he never worked. Well, Tetrisphere, right? So that one I was just talking about, the N64, that's the only real Tetris game in name that he actually worked on. So every other Tetris you see, he didn't work on it. It's just his idea. But so Tetris 2, when Nintendo came out with it, it changed the game, right? Going back to what I said, like, how do you build on a perfect game like Tetris? You add color. And this is where we start seeing, like, not only are we putting blocks together, but we're kind of matching colors. I don't think it was the start of the color matching. There were other puzzle games around that time that kind of were working on that more. Back in that time frame, there were a couple other games that were trying to taking that Tetris style and doing their own flip on it. Like, you look at Puyo Puyo, which was more adding colors together, creating blocks that way. Then one I'll get into soon with the next Tetris game kind of changes it, and I think actually kind of creates that almost match 3 thing. But on the Super Nintendo, Tetris Attacks came out, and I remember playing this actually quite a bit as a kid. And in Japan, it was paneled upon, and over here, basically, it was called Puzzle League, which actually was throughout the years. I don't think there hasn't been one since 2016, which was Animal Crossing Puzzle League. But It's always been a Nintendo franchise. I played Pokemon Puzzle League a lot back in the day on the N64 and loved it. And basically, it's kind of like your match 3. You're matching colors and symbols, and you do battles that way as well. But at that point, I personally feel it takes everything away from Tetris, right? Like the color, the symbols, all of that, it doesn't have that same feel of, okay, we need to fill this space, right? We can't have an open space. And Tetris started taking some really weird turns after that and kind of just became totally different games of itself. It always had that core, like, put these blocks together, but when you really look at like the places that it went on all these other platforms, it changed. In maybe some good ways, some not so good ways, but it's interesting to see like other people's attempts at trying to revolutionize or evolve the formula. But at least in my opinion, when you look at all these, spiritual successors to it, they just don't feel the same because they're adding all these extra mechanics to it that, say you give it to, your dad who has played a lot of Tetris, but then you give him, say, a Puzzle League game, he's going to have to learn something different. And for some people, that could be not as easy to get into. Whereas Tetris, it's like you look at it, you get it, and it's not that hard.
Right.
And that's something I always found interesting with a lot of these later Tetris titles, that they add all these little mechanics, which to me never bothered me because I just, I play a lot of games. I understand it like a lot of us do. But for people that don't play games, that's a pretty big change in a way that it's not as accessible as just plain Tetris.
Yeah, it's interesting to see the evolution of it, right? And you can tell that people are trying to, like, everyone knows what Tetris is, and there's a lot of people, there's a lot more gamers out there now, so maybe they feel like they can branch out into more and like kind of gamify Tetris even further by adding these extra mechanics. But like you said, when you do that, you do muddy the waters a bit, right? Like you take away from a quote unquote perfect game. Like it's Tetris. It makes sense. It's clear, concise. Every single person can pick it up and just play it and enjoy it. Now, not to say that there aren't some interesting titles out there that use Tetris in very creative ways, but I do think that the most interesting one that I've seen is a recent game. It's Blocky Dungeon, right, where it's Tetris meets dungeon crawling. So you actually are creating the dungeon by laying down the Tetris blocks, which are actually rooms, but it's all in the shape of the Tetris blocks in order for your guy to get around, collect loot, fight monsters, and all that good stuff. But when you do make lines, like it is very different style, right? Like, so while yes, it is a very interesting thing, you are kind of taking away from the core mechanic of Tetris itself. So is it fun? Does it have the longevity that Tetris does? I don't know, because with the simplicity behind this game, behind the original Tetris, you can't really beat that, right? It's one you can play for endless hours. It's a no-brainer game, which is nice sometimes. There's just something about that you just can't really beat at all. So while it is really cool to see some of these new iterations, you can't beat the classic. Can't beat the original.
I feel like one of the Tetris variants that really stood out to me is something that really took the core mechanic and did something different and really cool with it. Was maybe Tetris 99.
That is a cool idea.
I love that game. Like, I got really into that because it was fun. It was, your basic Tetris, but you're playing against all these people, and it's like frantic and fun, and it felt good. because it's like you're not changing the game at all.
Mm-hmm.
And you're adding this like multiplayer mechanic that just works. Like think 10 years ago, like Tetris Battle Royale, like what? There's no way, but it worked so well. But yeah, it's interesting to see, like when you look at the huge list of Tetris like titles, it's crazy how many there are, and there's a lot of them that have some interesting mechanics to it. But it's crazy to think that all these games have been made based off the original.
Yeah.
But the last big title that Patronov did, and for the Xbox users out there, or Microsoft users, because it was on other stuff before that, was Hexic, which I feel like, for me, I remember playing it on MSN, because I used to really like MSN Messenger back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember that being a game that you could play on. And I was always like, oh, this is kind of cool. It's an interesting idea. But I never really got into it until it was on the 360, right? The Hexic HD, Hexic 2. And for those out there that don't know what Hexic is, it's where you basically have to create flowers in like these blocks, right? It's another tile matching kind of game, but you have to create these flowers. So it's like basically you have to make this circular shape of like 6 blocks or tiles with one in the middle. And that's kind of how you get your points. And obviously you could chain it and do all that kind of stuff with it. Like it's very interesting, and it's very different than Tetris, but at the same time you can still kind of feel that creativeness of Tetris in it.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like while it seemed like it did really well, which I never knew it did, I always thought it was just a game that was just included with Xbox. I didn't realize like it was actually a big deal at one point. But yeah, I never knew that he made it. Like I was kind of surprised.
Man, that's actually really cool. All right, well, that's going to do it for us this week. I hope you guys enjoyed our little conversation into the history of Tetris. And it's just amazing to see how far this game has come from it just starting out as something that was made after work, something to pass the time and to blow off some steam. And now it is a household item. It's one of the top selling games in the world. It's been mimicked and copied all over for years, decades, right? Imagine that, right? Like it came out in 1986. So what is that? 40 years of Tetris so far? That's pretty impressive. It's amazing to see that it's still relevant, still fun, and the gameplay does not get old whatsoever. Just truly amazing stuff. But yeah. Anyway, like I said, that's going to do it for us this week. We'll talk to you guys next week with some more wonderful games, history games, art of games, all that good stuff. But until then, bye for now.